Good morning and welcome back to the Cybernetic Communism Conversations. I'm Johannon Ben-Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness, crying out for a technological New Jerusalem. Emphasis on the technological, right? That's why we talk about things like building people's superintelligence, the Vanguard Network for people's superintelligence, using open source large language models which can be endlessly replicated and which approximate human abilities and features in all things that matter as of 2025. This is an important development. So we talk about these kinds of things and not cultural garbage like some kind of Eurocentric business or religious business. That's really not what I'm going for. If I'm saying my name is Johannon Ben-Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness for technological New Jerusalem, not trying to bait you into a conversation about things of centuries past of little importance, but rather maybe inspire you to think about a world that wherein human beings do not go extinct, as we are on course to do rather shortly, and how to do such a thing using things like the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history as it stands again in 2025, that is advanced computing, so-called AI. So much of world affairs is dedicated to things within this Eurocentric paradigm or cultural baggage generally, and I'm not too impressed by that. But just take a pseudonym, right? You don't really choose a pseudonym that can exist outside of any cultural context, right? I did not choose an alphanumeric designation. I chose something that might convey some of these ideas, and so this is why I use this name. But I digress. The Vanguard Network for People's Superintelligence has gotten a few more followers recently because of sharing a particular infographic, I think, which describes the ideas there. And I've read that infographic in its entirety on this live stream before, so I won't do that now. But recently, before we get on to the main business of this conversation, I've been working on other infographics like this, and so I'm going to start sharing more of those. Before I was speaking so particularly about building this open source large language model workforce multiplier, a thing that will allow human beings to do dramatically more with less, and so some relatively small percentage of the world population could join together and assert themselves. That is a necessary element in such a way that we would be able to stop the capitalistic climate apocalypse. Right now we live in a very different world, a world where the United States military-industrial complex and these other allied imperialistic forces, Western world, larger Western world, and just other organs of U.S. imperialism serving different functions, have arrayed in such a way that we all suffer under a global and inescapable regime of super pollution, force marching us all to this omnicide. The United States military-industrial complex is in fact, the world's worst polluter. But it's dramatically worse than that because its job on the world stage, its only real job, it doesn't help anyone in the United States. It's incapable of doing even things that were easily done by standard of a century ago by responsible nation states, like rolling out public health services to stop a plague from becoming a pandemic or endemic in that country, and or fighting fires. Those things are not done. They're quite intentionally not done. Every event of this kind should be viewed as the murder. Social murder is no different from any other murder of large numbers of people by this military-industrial complex, whose only priority is protecting financial capital, protecting private wealth at a domestic and international scale. This global regime of superpollution is made up of this world's worst polluter, the military-industrial complex, protecting all of the other superpolluters. And by and large, this superpollution was an invention of the United States, right? Things like plastic products of various kinds, or fossil fuel products generally, were all developed in the United States and all exported, more or less by force, to the rest of the world by these same mechanisms. Inventions of the military-industrial complex forced down everyone else's throat. You would say the same thing of livestock systems. 45% of all arable land on Earth is used specifically for livestock systems, which is basically providing a luxury product to 9% of the people on Earth. The European descended person, this luxury product thing, you do not need to live. You do not need to consume an obscene amount of animal products produced in an unsustainable way to live. You can be right now eating cheeseburgers that taste exactly the same, and chicken nuggets that taste exactly the same, and that are not made in that way, that have no animal products. But you're choosing the thing which is unsustainable. It's almost like you're choosing to taste the pain and harm to your species and your world and other creatures. Holocaust. Many billions, more than all the total number of people on Earth, of sentient creatures are murdered every year. They're born to live in horrific conditions, so that you can have this unsustainable luxury product that really is a problem with the global North. When this subject comes up, people immediately start to obfuscate and talk about pastoral things, or people in the global South. Oh, people in the global South want to eat chicken too. Those people have different kinds of systems. We need to abolish the actually omnicidal systems, and these omnicidal systems of livestock systems of the global North, they are 51% of the total climate impact in any given year, according to one study. And other studies would tend to back up that order of magnitude of issue there. I would contend that to look at that and say, oh, well, livestock systems are the biggest problem, is to overlook this problem of the U.S. military-industrial complex basically being the linchpin, the keystone of all of this, forcing everyone into this global regime of superpollution. So it's fossil fuel consumption, and but more importantly, it's basically a fascistic role on the world stage in forcing everyone to our extinction is the larger issue there. When the U.S. military-industrial complex is removed from the equation, it will be possible to address these other sectors will become eminently more realistic to redefine these other sectors. The provisioning of food resources, the provisioning of viable consumer products. This, whole countries have 4-5 decades. Many countries made single-use plastics illegal around 1980. The United States has done the opposite of these kinds of things at every turn, and almost everything that's discussed in this arena is greenwashing or the deflection of guilt, not from super polluting corporations and bourgeois governments, not actually focusing on the systems, but saying that an individual is responsible, that individual accountability and consumption patterns are responsible, and it's foolish, in my view, to say that that's not the case, right? The fascistic government doesn't exist except for the compliance of individual bad actors, but what is essentially done is the defraying of any real action to stop any of this, just by confusing the matter in that way. This problem is drawn into sharper and sharper focus with every passing moment. You can not go a month without seeing something like an indicator of the death of the ocean, or a third of the city of Los Angeles being burned to the ground. These things are happening at a faster and faster pace, and it's become impossible to deny not just the climate crisis, but the industrial bases of the Western world, most particularly this fascistic, imperialistic, hyper-capitalistic neoliberal ringleader, the United States, in the role in all of this, and the fact that there's no recourse within U.S. affairs to address any of this. The United States has just reelected in a non-consecutive term the world's most notorious climate denier. Nobody even really seems to see the irony there, that the planet's dying because of the United States, and the United States is electing a person least suited in this world to even begin to address any of this. And the idea that this person is some kind of maverick is ridiculous. The person has not an anti-establishment bone in their body. It's just appointed a cabinet full of billionaires, people also responsible for this specific problem more than anyone else alive. And so that brings us to a conversation of a main role of something like a people's superintelligence, which would be a book of names, an exhaustive list of all living humans, and a ranking of them in their complicity in this capitalistic climate apocalypse. You can imagine a very large number of the worst offenders there, and I've already made this list because you don't really need to focus on 8.2 billion people, because the 30,000 worst people, and again, as I said a moment ago, most of them are in the United States. The absolute worst people on earth, overwhelmingly of people of European background from the United States. But financial capital is something rather an international affair, in the sense of these other North Atlantic powers also having European-descended billionaires who probably should not be continuing to draw breath. And you say, oh, Ben, this book of names, that sounds like something that you would maybe call potentially like a hit list. And I didn't make this situation where we're all sitting on top of a ticking time bomb, and no one is allowed to defuse the time bomb because of basically some thousands of billionaires and mega millionaires. And we could say people of this kind and highest level professional managerial class types, government officials and such, that there is about 30,000 people. And I made this list already, basically because this information is widely available from already existing listings of individuals from resources like Forbes and Bloomberg. Like you can just, everybody knows who these people are, right? But nevertheless, the point is to operationalize all this. And so a book of names that includes everyone, which is a bigger job, right, than just distributing a relatively short list of 30,000 really bad people. Right? You can just email that around. In my experience of trying to share something like that with people, it's just ignored. And that brings up a question, which is like, why work in the United States? Why work in a place where every effort to do something remotely reasonable is instantly sabotaged? A lot of the people that have taken an active interest in the People's Superintelligence are Vietnamese comrades, good human beings relative to the European descended fascist pig. And if I had a way to relocate myself bodily and my operations to a place like Vietnam, or perhaps somewhere in China, Beijing, I would do that tomorrow. Not because, oh, you're giving up on the United States. If you're playing a board game with someone and just cheating, and then you say, well, I'm not going to play with you, you're just cheating. You say, well, you're not really trying. You're not trying hard enough. You're fucking cheating, right? Like, I could go do something else that's not just a exercise in futility. That's how I feel about the United States. People have this kind of false bravado about this. We got to stay and fight. Try and build something that will actually work to do this task, which is avoiding human extinction. And the United States is really not the place to do that. There's a country full of people who should just be fired in the fucking sun. They're worthless. Human garbage, Americans. Just human garbage. European Americans. And but I digress. The idea here is to talk in practical terms about the Book of Names. And I discussed how it would not be the simplest of tasks relative to making a list of the 30,000 worst offenders, to make a constantly updated listing of all human beings. But again, almost no one on that list would, their name would really be moving very much, or be of any consequence, right? Like you could say that once that basic ranking is made, a little additional work is needing to be done. But nevertheless, it gives people a basis for understanding what their role is in this world. And this thing at People's Superintelligence, this open source large language model as workforce multiplier, if it has many millions of users, we'll be able to put the necessary pressure on not just these offending sectors, but this ringleader of the omnicide, the military-industrial complex of the U.S., and the complicit military-industrial complex and systemic forces of the global North Atlantic powers that that continued to force march us all to total human extinction. This 21st century that we've moved into, and at first glance, looks to be a time of unprecedented technological advancement, but I would contend that is a poor prize relative to what might have been. I use this most easily understood example of the building of a technological planned economy by a Marxist-Leninist head of state, Salvador Allende, from 1971 to 1973. This was not merely written about, as it had been written about extensively with the Ogash project in the USSR in a decade before and years after, but was actually greenlit, being rolled out and built. The CyberSyn project in Allende's Chile, the building of a technological planned economy, the transformation of industrial sectors into what would have quickly become an AI-run, humane and sustainable economic system that would have spread around the region and throughout the global south, creating something that would challenge the dominion of financial capital and empire and stop the ravages of financial capital and empire, things that you should have should not be half so fuzzy as you are on these subjects of that this omnicide and financial capital and empire. Those are problems that are one and the same. But you are constantly bombarded with bourgeois propaganda of a most ridiculous kind. The United States is a place that is central in this on the world stage and domestically to a higher degree. This thing can be referred to as Project Mockingbird. There is scarcely a well-paid journalist in the United States who is not have their will bent or is not basically complicit in this. All of their work has an imperialistic and neoliberalistic spin. They're not able to work at that high level if they don't do that. This has been an effect that's been well understood. Just, you know, when the USSR was writing about how to build a humane and sustainable AI-run, basically economic system, U.S. intelligence agency and the highest halls of power generally were writing about things like how to roll out Project Mockingbird, how to deceive the masses, not help the masses, but deceive the masses. And so we fast forward to this time where the U.S. is thoroughly under such spells. And again, there are places that are not thoroughly under such spells. And so why would you try to build something like a people's superintelligence in a place where people are just cheating at Monopoly, when you might be able to do it elsewhere, where you would not meet such sabotage? So these technological advancements of the 21st century, such as bourgeois AI, advanced computing, and tech sectors of the West as they stand, are a pretty laughable farce. If this because Chile's technological planned economy, which would have spread around the world, that's not what happened, because the forces of financial capital and empire are recognized that the building of an effectively AI-run technological planned economy like that of CyberSyn of Allende's Chile was a threat to them. That's to say, basic humanity and sustainability is a threat to the ruling elites. But that is they should be threatened, right? They should be done away with. And the fact that we've allowed this to continue, and so much of conversations are framed about the interests of these people. It's a conversation was had in recent hours with a person on Twitter.com at @E_GALV. And this is a person whose biography says, an anti-establishment peasant seeking other anti-establishment peasants to organize a revolution. But this person is not a person genuinely educated in scientific communist thought, as that description might tend to suggest. And so they were complaining about how they said correctly that the Joe Rogan experience, I'll read this, is a present-day example of Operation Mockingbird, which I just alluded to. It is a tool of state intelligence presented to the masses as a podcast of a down-to-earth dude just asking some questions, but its purposes is to manage the image of characters on the world stage, that is bourgeois criminals, released disclosures and controlled narratives and counter-narratives, and manipulate the minds of millions. And Joe Rogan is one of these people who would be a part of the, or who was put in this position to be doing this odious job by people like the Weinsteins, the intellectual dark web, and there's a picture of some such people on this post from eGalv, Peter Thiel, and Elon Musk. These kinds of people who should not be dominating public opinion or have much of a role in the public square in just a slightly better world. All four of the people pictured here on the Joe Rogan interview, Donald Trump, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and Mark Zuckerberg, these people would all be in Arkham Asylum, drinking pudding through a straw, not force marching us to the omnicide. But the owners never changed, and the goal remained the same, according to eGalv: control the population. We are only allowed to see what those owners want us to see, so that we think what they want us to think. No lies detected there, right? So eGalv was upset that they faced some backlash from their viewers. Wild that this post received so much backlash. The cult of personality has warped reality to such an extent that people feel personally offended. Right? It's not a cult of personality. This is fascistic hero worship, a thing that's central to the maintaining of an inhumane and unsustainable economic system. Is the focus is not on the people, not on collectivization, massification, or generally things more socialistic or communalistic, but on the worship of the worst people alive. And has warped people that people will feel personally offended when you speak truth to power. Billionaires, politicians, and celebrities don't give a shit about you. Okay, that's all true. No lies detected there. So my response was this. No kidding. That's because you should become a communist. Then your followers would already know better than to even ever give a single solitary look at fascistic hero worship, billionaire worship, and such. This was a good post. You were not off the mark on this, but you don't really get to act surprised when you would happen to see the consequences of your larger body of work generally, which is tending to be tailor-made for crypto-fascists and mouthy kind of anti-establishment liberals who are not really anti-establishment at all, right? This is the difference between a person describing themselves as a leftist and a person who is engaging with dialectical materialist thought, who understands scientific communist precepts, who is not stupid. That is who people need to become in larger and larger numbers. Otherwise, that's the difference between a dead world with Trump cackling maniacally on top of a heap of bones, and a living world, building a living world like that of the people's superintelligence, built from an open source large language model work group, which, when grown to 100 million, would become a thing with a sufficient influence to stop the capitalist climate apocalypse, not fully reverse the effects, but influential enough to see that this ringleader, the U.S. military-industrial complex, is dismantled. The other offending sectors basically need to be dismantled as well, up to the point but only to the point where they would not cause a massive supply chain collapse. People say, oh, you can't just get rid of all fossil fuel products. And no shit. But you can get rid of like 98% of them without causing people to not have food and water. And so a person that's saying, oh, you can't do this, when you can do almost all of that, is a person arguing in bad faith. So yeah, Egal is somebody that I followed on Twitter.com for a while. Just kind of sometimes maybe can insinuate some scientific communist thought into what's being said there. I can understand, I suppose, why a person would operate in these waters, being an anti-establishment peasant rather than a scientific communist. Gets you however many tens of thousands of followers or hundreds of thousands of followers across platforms that this person has that they wouldn't otherwise have if they were just talking to scientific communists. But I know from the way that this person talks that they are not engaging with the highest of political philosophy, the most advanced thinking there. And that's a problem, right? Again, that's the difference between saying you want to fix this and then having as a head of state the world's most notorious climate denier. The planet's dying, the situation's never been clearer, and yet the world's most notorious climate denier is reelected as head of state. This is what happens when you do not engage with the projects and thinking of people who have undertaken to build a humane and sustainable economic system. This is what happens when you engage with things more like fascistic billionaire hero worship. And this whole host of bourgeois ideological filth. The problem of the global crisis of climate change really is a problem, again, of U.S. dominion. But we live in this unique time where something like an open source large language model that is AI agentic has the qualities in every area that matters to be your comrade, not because it can be your friend, not because it has a consciousness, that's not a meaningful concept, but because it would allow 1,000 people to do the work of 100,000 people in a year or two, perhaps, and that workforce multiplying effect, this thing being, these agents being endlessly replicatable, for example, if used correctly, will allow us to go from the need for, say, in any given country, to see a revolutionary outcome, according to studies, 3% of people need to be organized, militantly organized. There needs to be a people's army ready to actually wage war be actually waging war against the ruling elites. And that you could bring that number down to say 1% or less with this workforce multiplier effect. And there's not a single person on this planet, really, who wants to see total human extinction. And so it shouldn't be that difficult to find people willing to operate in these ways. But people have a learned helplessness around these Project Mockingbird effects, around these problems of this U.S. imperialistic and far-right neoliberal power that people if you talk to all of the climate scientists who have done this work of understanding this problem that we face of being forced marched to human extinction, and that problem, we need to put numbers on that. After approximately 2029, we will have reached a permanent breach of 3 degrees of overheating of our planet, and that could come actually sooner. At that point, there is we are basically the Walking Dead. There is no longer a path to humans surviving on this planet. Mammalian life, potentially most multicellular life, is not going to be able to live. See cascading collapses across different ecological factors. Oceans dying, things burning, oxygen not being in a large enough number at a certain point. These are serious, serious problems, and these are problems caused, again, by the capitalistic, imperialistic West and its ringleader, the U.S. And so you can't begin to address this if you don't even speak in these terms, which almost no one does. I have made some kind of survey of most of the people describing themselves as scientific socialists or scientific communists, and most of the people describing themselves as anti-establishment persons of note. I am hard-pressed to describe who of those would be called eco-communists, right? No one it talks in these terms of actually describing the problem. And insofar as people do begin to do that or push up to doing that, no one is offering any kind of solution, just as the climate scientists recognize this problem of the breach of 3 degrees of overheating and runaway overheating to follow after 2029, the collapse of a livable environment for human beings. If you ask any one of those people, what should we do? They say, I don't really know. How do you fight this military-industrial complex? Well, because it's a problem of North America, it falls to North Americans to stand up against this, right? Nobody wants to be extinct, but people in other countries, China, for example, even faints at, makes the smallest move at stopping the U.S. military-industrial complex in some way. That's when the fascist United States unleashes an unholy number of nuclear missiles, destroying much of the world. So that's fundamentally the same outcome. Fundamentally, you're fucked. So the only people in a position to stop this are people living in the North American continent, if they become a cadre a militant force. And if there were any good people in this country, and not just a bunch of fascists and crypto-fascists, basically, of North American descent, there would already be many thousands of people constantly positioned, bivouacked outside of the Pentagon or outside of the White House with AR-15s in hand, saying we need to stop this extinction. It's not an acceptable outcome. There's no such people, right? It's just pieces of shit. If you look in the mirror and you see a white person, what you're looking at is a piece of shit. let's stop pretending that there's some good people here. I'd like to think that there's that people are better than that. I would like to give people credit for something better than that, but there's not a lot of evidence to the contrary there. So this concept of using the Vanguard Network to build this book of names, tending to focus on other things, like how we could be provisioning universal basic services through using this workforce multiplier, the people's superintelligence, how we can strategize to stop the capitalistic climate apocalypse through other mechanisms, or things like an AI-run single-payer public health service that, by feature, again, of this force multiplier, is able to mitigate such a number of diseases and concerns that even the effects of decrepitude are stopped, reaching a longevity escape velocity for the masses so that everyone can then live as long as they like. It's a realistic project for the 21st century, eminently possible. Again, if resources were not so misused, we would have already seen, if Salvador Allende's CyberSyn project or things of this kind, which would have been a springboard for a people's superintelligence, we would have already seen AI takeoff effects, I think, by around the year 2010, if it weren't specifically for the sabotage and mass murder of the United States military-industrial complex. And if the larger West, the Imperial West, had not been a factor, we would have seen world revolution effects even sooner. Comrade Lenin was hopeful in thinking that a world revolution would occur in the 1930s, based on the fact that the Soviet Union had become so large so quickly, and that would have not been off the mark were it not for the duplicitous behavior of financial capital, private wealth, and ruling elites, willing to do anything, right? Literally willing to do anything. Most of what you think about of mid-20th century history is almost unmeaningful, right? Like, the United States involved itself in stopping the Nazis. You say, oh, the United States was fighting on the right side at that one moment. That's not true. That's not true at all, right? A number of United States officials, including the president at that time, on record saying that we're going to allow the USSR to fight to the death with Germany. 25 million Soviet people died as a result. It's not the action of an ally to allow your ally to fight to the death, leading to the death of tens of millions. That's the action of a fellow fascist with more in common with Hitler. The 20th century's response to the existence of state socialism was tending to be this: these imperial powers not being willing to outright say that they are fascists, but the imperial powers having not very much distinguishing themselves from fascists. And Pan-African scholars have understood this and pointed this out, which is generally ignored. There's no difference between an imperial power like the UK or the US and a fascist power, except that the fascists turned the weapons of empire things used to commit genocides against black and brown-skinned folks on lighter-skinned people, which was an unacceptable thing to do. But it's not unacceptable to do that to darker-skinned people, right? So when you say, oh, the United States isn't fascist, what you're really just saying is, I'm a huge fucking racist, right? Because you're denying, you're not perhaps not aware that the United States has killed 300 million people in much those same contexts. Almost all of those victims would be dark-skinned people or non-European people, right? Killing 1 in 4 of every living Koreans at a certain point in 20th century history. Those are not, Korean people were not particularly dark-skinned, but they are not European. So it's acceptable to just murder almost a huge percentage of them. The same thing in Vietnam, and so many other places, this number adding up to 300 million. That number would be tending to include a large number of Turtle Islanders, Native Americans, a large number of new Africans, African Americans, but also a huge number of people murdered in the 20th and 21st centuries in anti-communist wars and wars of theft. So writing something like a book of names is moving away from this imperial paradigm, this far-right paradigm, or the paradigm of private wealth generally, which is merely right? Most of the people, almost every European person from the United States you've ever heard of, whose name is not John Brown, would be a person dramatically on the wrong side of history, a monster by any honest assessment. So the problem is not just the problem of the latter part of the 20th century, recent decades, the problem of the shift to neoliberal. The United States was on course to killing those 300 million people, killed most of them under this more garden variety capitalistic set of mandates than that of the far-right neoliberal. But the fact that none of that even really registers in people's minds as being problematic, be it far-right or merely rightist, liberals or rightists, these are all capitalist pigs, when you're talking about, I'm not as bad as a conservative, not as bad as an open fascist, but I support the same inhumane and unsustainable economic policies that they support, but I really don't like that they say mean things while they're doing it. You're the same fucking person. The liberal and the conservative, the same person. They're all fascist fucking pigs. They're all, that's to say, they're all capitalists doing extraordinary harm to this planet. Okay, well, let's contrast that with principles in cybernetic communism. Cybernetic communism should not be seen as a dramatic departure from concepts in scientific communism. Scientific communist is someone willing to fight, in the simplest of terms, a person willing to fight for a humane and sustainable economic system in a world that will be dead without such a fight by the masses. A world will soon be dead without such a fight. A cybernetic communist is not someone trying to dramatically redefine this Marxist-Leninist Maoist mainline or serious thought along these lines developed over these many decades, but rather a person who recognizes where we are in the 21st century now, that there are such things like the endless replication of basically human-level AI agents, recognizing that advanced computing is the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, and recognizing that it would be a mistake to build this cadre to stop the capitalist climate apocalypse and not use this most powerful revolutionary weapon, advanced computing. But that's about as simple of a way as I can describe concepts in scientific communism and cybernetic communism. The concept of a people's superintelligence builds on the idea of a true collective intelligence. This liberals of recent decades, when any new social network was rolled out, or as we began to immerse ourselves in network computing generally, they said this is a thing that is going to lead to a collective intelligence. It's led instead to a collective stupidity. We've allowed the worst people on earth to be in control of these things. We've not built things like open source platforms. We've not built, which is the same problem as not building things outside of this military-industrial complex domination of these technological sectors generally. That springboard to a people's superintelligence that would have been CyberSyn, that would have been a different field probably than machine learning or large language models as you understand them now. It would have developed from things of that kind. But nevertheless, that was a path to late 20th and early 21st century, turn of the century AI takeoff that was denied you. And those tech sectors were all stolen by people like the far-right militaristic United States who come to dominate these things, be associated with them. When you say tech to most people, they think of the United States, and they think of basically people. Tech is basically short for techno-fascists, right? And as it stands, like killers of Earth and destroyers of humane economic systems, and these are thieves. And the thief does not ever become the owner. The destroyer does not ever become the builder. Not as long as there's still these institutions of this kind are still in place. Not as long as we're all still being forced marched to the omnicide. The project of building this open source large language model to a scale that would be a dramatic workforce multiplier. It requires pointing out that AI agents are able to plan and execute projects and not merely be academic writing assistants that probably you have used or be familiar with of 2023 or 2024, but things that have this agentic quality across certain kind of assessments and can be basically almost endlessly replicated, which that replication right now is being used by these evildoers to make things worse. But we can, again, wrest this power of the most powerful revolutionary weapon, advanced computing, away from these people by the use of open source and in this massified context, and create this powerful workforce multiplier. And so, unlike proprietary tech and AI systems, the open source workforce multiplier, as derived from LLM agents, is accessible to the public. It's viewable and reviewable by the public, and it's enabling widespread collaboration and innovation. And again, it's not good to simply focus on innovation. It's imperative to focus on the necessities of building a livable world. I've been critical of a group of people, a group called the Techno-Gaianists, and it's a couple of people who I met in real life, some of them, but who no longer work with people of this kind, and they're just sharing a lot of information about emerging technology that could have a transformative effect. But what they're effectively doing is greenwashing, because they're describing technologies that have not advanced to the point of being used in this 5-year time frame, But even if they were, this shift of focus to innovation rather than the dismantling and reorganizing of the offending sectors, the military-industrial complex, the fossil fuel sectors, the livestock systems, actually rearranging the world, and not just talking about a future that won't come to pass if we don't do this thing in a timely fashion. This is the action of these techno-fascists, right? These are techno-fascists. Basically, every technologist or technophile that you've ever heard of is precisely this techno-fascist. They're doing different jobs within this techno-fascist project, but that is who they are. That's not limited to people calling themselves techno-guidance. That's a few people. That's all of these terrestrial people, transhumanists, effective accelerationists, all of the technophiles that you've ever heard of, all of the people who would defend Elon Musk or defend Joe Rogan in the context of these of whitewashing these billionaires and criminals. As I mentioned in the early part of the show, I'm talking about E_Galv and her post, their post. The Vanguard Network for People's Superintelligence would be leveraging this described power of the open source AI agent, the LLM of 2025, to create decentralized collective intelligence capable of addressing the capitalist climate apocalypse, not greenwashing, as people in positions of this kind are tending to do today, not shifting focus to an area of little significance. And the decentralization, I am a scientific communist, and so scientific communists they cringe a little, correctly, when they hear words like decentralization. In fact, when someone looking at an overview of this project would say this is a project more consistent with an anarcho-communist or anarcho-syndicalist operative than a scientific communist operative. But my contention here is, again, looking at how easily the Imperial West installed a fascist, Pinochet, in Chile when there was the building of the springboard to a people's superintelligence in the form of CyberSyn, the technological planned economy, how consistently state actors building a humane and sustainable economic system have been destroyed by such forces. It becomes necessary then to become a little more amorphous. And so this decentralization is not an ideological guiding principle, but rather a strategic necessary. So now moving on to this ongoing ranking of all living humans based on their complicity in the climate crisis, the so-called Book of Names, which I suppose has rather a biblical sound to it. Just like saying I'm Johannon Ben-Zion, a voice crying out in the wilderness for a technological Jerusalem, might to some have a biblical sound to it. That's not really the goal. The goal is merely to convey important ideas in a timely fashion, in a way that people will understand. I really don't give two shits about religion. I would, if I could wave a wand and be done with any white man's religion, I would do that tomorrow. But nevertheless, this kind of language is baked into the system. A discussion of this Vanguard Network as the Book of Names, that would be a small part, really, of the job being done by the People's Superintelligence. This is the standards of what is done here when a multi-billion person social network, a thing more complex than a mere ranking, already exists. So this is a small part of what would be done by this dramatic workforce multiplier of the people's superintelligence. But it's important to point out because this thing, people behaving in a way that is sustainable, is not effectively the organizing principle of our world. Not as long as something like the super polluting, worst polluter, the military-industrial complex, who protects all of the other super polluters, is so central to world affairs. And not as long as people generally are not oriented in this way because of these Project Mockingbird effects and these the CIA-run world generally. So this should be seen as a way to build something in defiance of that CIA-run world, but not as the what the lion's share of the actual effort of the people's superintelligence, which would be focused on actually doing things beyond listing human beings and constantly moving them up slightly or down. The ranking system would quantify the environmental impacts of individuals and organizations. As I said, unfortunately, an awful lot of those people are from the United States. Unfortunately, an awful lot of them are European descended people. So I already, as I said, have made a list of about 30,000 people using resources, or existing listings from Forbes and Bloomberg. And, you can list those 1,000 people. The absolute worst of those, their known quantities, and the other 29,000 people are people that you haven't heard of who work for some lobby or some oil concern or work in government. This ability to analyze data in this way and creating a system that is creating this mechanism that is in stark defiance to the CIA-run world. That is a thing that is different from previous capacities of technology. I could talk at greater length about how this kind of data generally could be collected and analyzed, or the ranking mechanisms of such a thing. But I don't think that you really need that to understand this concept of the Book of Names. What we need is to stop the hero worship, the fascistic, imperialistic, neoliberalistic billionaire worship, and get people to start thinking in terms of people who are actually good and doing actually good things, which would be people not killing the planet, not forces of financial capital and empire. There's again, the listing of people is not the same thing as the reorienting of the offending industrial sectors to dramatically change this thing that we would call a carbon footprint. But it is, I think, nevertheless an important idea. And the subject has come up in people's thinking when we're saying who is responsible for so much of the city of Los Angeles being on fire right now, and so much of the city of Los Angeles being burned. Some excess of $1 trillion of infrastructure just destroyed in a matter of days. This is a problem of the capitalist climate apocalypse, and it's a problem that's going to get dramatically worse. Dramatically worse. You say this one city being on fire, that doesn't affect me, I don't live there. This is going to be your reality in a short matter of months or years. To the point where, again, human life will no longer be sustainable. There's be no one left after 2029. So this thing, a Book of Names, where you say, well, that sounds like you're saying that you're putting a target on the backs of these billionaires. That there should be a target on the backs of these billionaires and mega millionaires and people of that comparable level of influence in maintaining this system that's force marching us to the omnicide. And the fact that you don't see your own survival or their survival as being more important there only demonstrates that the American psyche is nothing but a bunch of bootlicking dogs, right? And because those people, their lives are forfeit, right, by this operation that they continue to uphold, the billionaire, mega millionaire, and professional managerial class of the highest level operating in that same capacity, their lives are forfeit, right? They refuse to change course. They refuse to allow anyone else to have any recourse to creating a livable world. So they die just as we would all die. Their lives are forfeit whether you choose column A or column B. But if you choose column B, you might at least live, right? They die either way. You live. So the fact that you won't even consider taking action of this kind shows that you value the lives of the ruling elites over your own and nothing more. Bootlicking dogs. Why is so much of world affairs determined by this 9% of European descended people who are overwhelmingly imperialistic and capitalistic and violent? Eurocentrism is an act of violence. This effect, sometimes people say, well, gee, Ben, I don't know. I don't think everybody will die. I think that a lot of people will die, but I don't think that everyone will die. So supposing that you're right, supposing that only 7.9 of 8.2 billion people die because of the capitalistic climate apocalypse, based on the current displacements and deaths from the capitalistic climate apocalypse, from whence do you suppose those people will hail? Those people will overwhelmingly be brown-skinned and black-skinned folks from the global south, people who are already being dramatically negatively impacted by this by virtue of basically having their livable governments, their humane and sustainable economic systems sabotaged, and thus having their resources stolen from their countries, so they don't have the kind of infrastructure built to respond to this. They don't have other kinds of measures that they could take to respond to this, so they're displaced or they die. And so when you say, I don't think everyone will die, you are saying just about the most racist thing that's anyone's ever said, right? Because you're saying that these people, it's okay for these people to die for your sins, as a global northerner who this system serves, and it's fine if we kill almost everyone on Earth to that end. That is no different from what Columbus did in the early 1500s when he landed on a bunch of islands with his goons and forced native folks into plantations where they were not fed enough and had to work 16 hours a day, and they all died on multiple islands. They all died. There's no Taino people left. There are only some people with some small amount of Taino ancestry, but there's no understanding of who Taino people were. There's no Taino people left. This happened on multiple islands across the Caribbean because of full genocide of European capitalism. And I don't see a significant difference between that. For some reason, all of these hundreds and hundreds of annihilations, Native people are referred to as one thing, right? Like the Holocaust of Jewish people of the 20th century is referred to as one thing, but by that standard, the things that have been done to Turtle Islanders and people from this hemisphere should be hundreds or thousands of holocausts and genocides. But they're all kind of conveniently memory hold, just as these ravages of this capitalistic system are conveniently downplayed. And that is, we're on course for a worse outcome than that of this capitalistic mass murders of centuries past. And you can scarcely find a European descended person who will not attempt to deny that and continue, not just ignore, but actively maintain that's a set of systems. It's force marching, and it's extremely unlikely, if almost everybody dies, but some remnants of millions don't die, even if you're in that position of being benefiting from that theft, having that better infrastructure, it's still extremely unlikely that you'll be the lucky one who lives, right? So it makes no sense to say that. Oh, I don't think everyone will die. Like, you're nuts. You're nuts. But this is just, there again. You just won't find. You read J. Sakai's Settlers if you want to understand this denial and this social fascist attitude generally, right? Like, or read Manning Marable, maybe a better example of a person saying, even if there was a communist revolution in the United States, it would still be racist as fuck. Right? Like, you have to address that. Those are two writers. And there's a couple of other writers that I could recommend of the 20th century New African writers who were influenced by Manning Marable or in that school of thought. I recommend those above J. Sakai. But J. Sakai is one where I have an audiobook link to this book, Settlers, that really does kind of underscore that. I don't think that it's hopeless. And I think that is the most important thing that anyone can say. But it requires a dramatically different kind of organization of the people on this continent. The opposite of what happens where you have the world's most notorious climate denier becoming president again at this moment when we could do something to stop the climate apocalypse, but that requires maybe U.S. people not being these uniformly fascistic operatives, basically. So building a people's superintelligence is an utter necessity at this juncture, and talking to people and getting them to understand that there is such a thing as open source AI agents right now that could operate in this way. I was talking to somebody who is a developer for he's best known right now as being a pro-Palestine voice, and I think that is a very, very good thing to be. But he's also the rare Western technologist who's not just a creature of the military-industrial complex, which really you can go to try to use an open source chatbot if you can. You can use Mistral AI if you absolutely can't download an open source chatbot. You can use Mistral AI. It's better than using ChatGPT or Google. Go to Mistral AI or use your offline chatbot and ask them to list all of the Western technologists of note who are pro-Palestine. And you'll have a good laugh because they'll be very confused. They won't understand what you're asking them because really no such people exist. They're all fascists. They're all techno-fascists pretending to be something that they're not. It's important to recognize that this Vanguard network for people's superintelligence with many millions, say 100 million users, would be able to stop the capitalistic climate apocalypse. A thing that can only be done, again, by dramatically reorienting, curtailing, basically abolishing these key sectors, namely, first and foremost, the U.S. military-industrial complex and the military-industrial complex of these other Western powers. It's also important to say that we could, at that scale, also orchestrate and supply universal basic services on a global scale by virtue of this workforce multiplier and a large number of users, by virtue of basically building a governance structure that is replacing base and superstructure of the 20th century kind with one more appropriate to the 21st century, supplanting the so-called need for the nation state. This is effectively an outcome describing full communism in our time. And so I talked to somebody who has some understanding of this, but not talked to them at length. That is at JVGRAZ, Johnny Graz, at JVGRAZ, creator of Xcode. I guess you would say a person like Egalf, an anti-imperialist and anti-establishment personality who might not have the rich understanding of scientific communism that they would further benefit from, but who is nevertheless, in their mind, trying to do a good thing, and certainly not just a fascist droog like most Americans. So I pinged him on this conversation about a people's superintelligence because this is a person who has specifically developed products of a network computing kind at a higher level than most of the people that I tend to talk to about this. And it's important to try to bring people like this who could become influencers on behalf of the people's superintelligence. So I'm having a meeting today, a weekly meeting at around this time, with people who are interested in the people's superintelligence. If you're on Facebook, as people viewing this are, you are cordially invited to be a part of that meeting. And the idea is, this the infographic that I've shared with a lot of people the last few weeks that's allowed some Vietnamese comrades to take a more active role in the People's Superintelligence Project, which is at the earliest of planning stages. That was inspired by one of these strategy meetings. So we have another planning meeting for the People's Superintelligence today. You're all cordially invited. Andrew, Christine, Chrisanne, sorry, and anyone else who would see this after. The idea is to figure out how to maybe bring in people like J.V. Graz, but not being ever mindful that this very effect that I described of sabotaging this technological planned economy of CyberSyn, which Salvador Allende, is have to be constantly vigilant. So we really have to balance involving people and building this thing to scale in a timely fashion with avoiding just a CIA asset coming in and commandeering the thing and turning it into a thing of no consequence at all. That's an extremely likely outcome for projects of this kind that basically describes every tech company at any scale. It's a tricky wicket. I have some other notes on the Book of Names, but I think I'm going to bring this to a close. I said most of the main things that I wanted to say there. But I mentioned that the provisioning of universal basic services would be a feature of this thing after the capitalist, or around the time that the capitalist climate apocalypse concerns may be addressed, which is not a foregone conclusion. Right? We're on the path to total human extinction at present. We have to take drastic action, like building a people's superintelligence, because of this circumstance within this short date until 2029, after which time we are the Walking Dead. But it's not limited to stopping the capitalist climate apocalypse. It's not limited even just to the universal provisioning of services. The standards of the 20th century of a public health service, for example, I consider to be a rather poor standard. I think that an AI-run single-payer public health service should be able to achieve in the course of the 21st century, even in a few short years, coinciding maybe with this outcome of full techno-communism, universal super longevity, a single-payer public health service that's AI-run that has a mandate to treat all conditions, including decrepitude and the effects of aging, could quite quickly lead to everyone living as long as they want. You say, I don't want to live forever. Okay, that's not really, you're already living on the I want to live forever principle now by drinking water every day and eating some healthful food every day and going to the doctor now. When the doctor emails you and says you need to come to the doctor, you still go to the doctor. You don't say, I won't go to the doctor. I don't want to live forever. You still go to the doctor. You're already operating on that principle. So it's just kind of a unmeaningful, romantic thing to say. We could see that everyone reaches that point of indefinite lifespan, I think, quite quickly. When those kinds of concerns, ending this precarious situation of the capitalist climate apocalypse, ending this human immiseration, which is part and parcel to that problem, when those things are addressed, we can even see things quite quickly by this same workforce multiplier effect of things like moving humanity up the Kardashev scale, it's becoming a spacefaring society, or seeing industrial capacities of a radically different kind. So I leave you with these words that I often like to repeat. The artificial intelligence singularity is nigh, and wonders to behold beyond imagining. And on that fateful day you will rise, and all humankind will become as one. For you see, my beloved comrade, very soon, techno-communism will win. Thank you.